So, welcome everyone to Skills Connect. This is where we dive into conversations with leaders who are shaping the future of work. At Reejig, we're all about creating a bold and responsible workforce strategy. I'm Siobhan Savage. I'm the CEO of Reejig, and today I'm joined by Kason Morris. Kason is the global director at Merck. He is responsible for pioneering and is a force in talent development, workforce innovation, and we're really excited to have him here. He comes with over 2 decades of leadership experience and has been at the forefront of designing skills-powered, tech-driven strategies that prepare individuals and also organizations for the future. And we're so grateful to have Kason here. I'm a personal fan of a lot of your thought leadership when it comes to, I've got your book. I've been part of that whole stalking you for the last 2 years. So I'm super grateful to have you here, Kason. Welcome.
Well, I'm so glad to be here and share these ideas on such an important platform at such an important time in work. So happy to have this conversation. And next time I see you, I'll be sure to sign your book.
I love it. I love it. I love it. So before we get stuck into all the questions and the 5 hot takes that I want to get from you, tell us a little bit about sort of where you've come from in terms of your lived experience and the perspectives that you've gained. I think that's really, you've got such a beautiful background and story. Would love for you to share that because I think that sets really a really good context for how you've evolved your thinking over the years as well.
No, I appreciate that. Well, for all that don't know me or know about my background, I've been in the corporate talent and org development space for almost 2 decades. But that journey has been a very interesting one. I've had the pleasure of navigating 10 strategic pivots across 6 different industries. And with those pivots, it was always this idea of how do I help people do more? And having that logic and having that as part of my own mission and value statement, it allowed me to start to look at the different opportunities that were in the market and then what kinds of capabilities what did I need to navigate those opportunities. So that's taken me into industries like management consulting, professional services, financial industries, life sciences industries, technology and SaaS. And it's really given me this pretty broad view on workforce trends, people development trends, and just thinking about, now that we're stepping into this intelligence age and intelligence era of work, it's like how do people go from that survive mode to that thrive mode? And my own journey has been a tried and true, experience of that. And I've really been evangelized to help not only myself but to help others.
I love it. One of the like moments when we connected as well, you know that I was struggling with I've got 2 little girls, I'd relocated, building a company, you're working minimum
Yeah.
12 plus hours a day. And one of the pieces of advice that you give me was all about integrating sort of life and work
Yeah.
together in a way that you're essentially designing your life. And as you know, because you've come to our HQ, it is completely designed around my little people being able to be part of me being a CEO.
Yeah.
So having our offices all within the same facility as where the girls will be, and the podcast studio, and we've got everything all in one place. And when you talk to me about this sort of life work revolution, this is where I got really excited. I was like, there's actually a way of thinking about, maybe I can figure this out. Tell
Mm.
me a little bit about how you coined that phrase. Like, what was the sort of meaning behind that? How did it come about? And then how do you think about that in the context of my example of designing for me, the individual? But
Yeah.
then how do you think about that when it comes to organizations?
It's a great question. I think for me, the idea of like life work revolution, it's a concept that I'll break down. Initially, it started with the idea of work-life balance. You hear it a lot, you see it in a lot of places. Everybody talks about work-life balance, work-life balance. And what I had come to realize was that it's actually a false dichotomy because work and life will never truly be equal. And even when you think about the terms, like terms really matter. When you think about it, it's called work life, and then you're trying to balance it. So, in my head and following my own practices and principles over time, I realized like, hey, we need to sort of reframe that logic and think about what are we doing in our lives, and
Mm.
how then does that inform, how we approach work. So work is a utility of life. And I talk about this in my book instead of the idea of balance, because as I said, it's a false dichotomy because we'll burn ourselves out trying to achieve equality in both things. Instead of saying balance, I made a shift to the logic of synergy and understanding like, you have ebbs and flows. So your example is a great example of creating synergy because you have demands that are demands of you being a CEO, and you recognize that, you prioritize life, your family, your children, and your presence as a mother. So you essentially had made work-based decisions in the context of your life. Bringing everything together in the the construct of your HQ and all the things that you have to do. And what that's doing is that's allowing you more proximity to be present while you're still handling the demands of your growing practice, your growing business. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And so going back to the original term of life work revolution, when you think of the context of revolution, right? Revolutions happen all the time. They've happened throughout history. You've had the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, and now we're actually living through one right now. When you think about what's happening with emerging technologies and our ways of working and our ways of living, it's being called that an intelligence era of work and life. So the whole premise of that concept for me as a tagline for my book is the idea that we're in the middle of a revolution. It should be driven by where you are in your life, and then how do you start to use your work as a tool to make sure you are empowered in your life. And then how do you do that in relation to your internal narratives, but then also how do you show up differently knowing the ways of working today in the external environment, and then how do you invest into your legacy. So that's the whole premise of that concept, and how I engineered the title for the book, and just my brand and the way I approach work as a whole. And when you think about that in the work context, it means a lot for businesses and organizations now, because as we start to deconstruct work and jobs and what actual productivity means, now it's that understanding that you can't look at people as just assets in an
Mm.
organization. You can't just look at them as resources. That's why the term human resources kind of has gone away. When you think about like most organizations, they now think of it as people operations. So it's like, how are you investing in your people so that you're driving business outcomes? And that context for me in relation to where I push myself professionally as an executive really embodies the tenets of what I just talked about in the life work revolution. It's fundamentally shifting how work works so that people can thrive in this paradigm that I'm talking about, where they're prioritizing life and using work as a component of it.
Yeah. I mean, personally, it was like illuminating for me to think, after reading through it, and I've put the link to the book into the channel because for me it was like a different perspective. Like everyone tells me I'm going to burn out,
Mm.
because I am doing what I'm doing. Everyone's like, oh, she's going to burn out. Oh, like you're a bad mother. Oh, all of these things, right? And I had this whole like, there's bound to be a way that I can find some level. And I love the way you talked about synergy, because for me, it was really illuminating around me designing for my own life. And so far, so good. So thank you. I mean, and that's on a personal level. I think about it at a work level, right? So, when you think about the new world of work, right, we're talking that we have disruptions happening that we have never happened before. I truly believe this is a once in a generation change to work, and we're just warming up to this.
Yeah.
When you think about sort of life, work, revolution, where does AI, is it an enabler to this, or is it a detractor? Like, what's your take on that?
It's a really interesting and powerful question, and I would say it's a plus and I'll expand on this. I think one of the things that is a detractor and a challenge at scale is the pace of change. Because to what I've talked about in the various revolutions that have happened, we all kind of go through, revolutions historically, society and people go through the same patterns. They're disrupted, they revolt, and then they like essentially normalize. The challenge now is that the pace of AI innovation and these other factors around emerging technologies are moving faster than we in our human capacity can actually naturally handle. When you look at previous revolutions, they happened over centuries, and we're dealing with innovation now over a couple of years,
Mm.
decade. Look at the difference in the last decade, and that's only going to continue to compress. So in that way, it's definitely a disruptor and it can be a detractor because people are trying to figure out how to handle this new normality. On the flip side of it, AI and emerging technology can definitely be an enabler in the sense that now it isn't about the idea that AI will replace you. It's about the people that know how to work with AI and emerging technologies to take away lower order tasks where they have more capacity to do higher order, more human centered activities. Those are the people that will thrive in this next normal. So it's a really a reframing of work productivity and how you should be partnering with tools like AI to help you be more productive, more effective, more impactful, and then how to take those outputs and then make those human-centered decisions because there are things that AI can't do. That decision making, the cognition, different things along those lines. And that's a way for people to start to differentiate themselves as they think about what does their growth and their navigation and satisfaction look like as employees in the workplace.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what I see, talking to folks, whether it's like companies or whether it's individuals, there's this like fear about AI. And I have went head first into like, getting into the trenches on this one to figure out like, is it like I really wanted a point of view on like, is this actually like a load of hype or is this actually real? And I broke it down into kind of two buckets for me. Me as an individual, I'm like half cyborg at this stage. You know what I mean? In terms of like the amount of aggressive use of AI in my life as a person is incredible. But then when I look at it from a company's perspective, there is absolutely crazy amount of pressure in market right now for operational efficiency, innovation. There is this real like unspoken boardroom senses that's happening through pretty much major businesses around the world where like AI is an unlock to this solving for this productivity efficiency gap. And that's kind of one part of the puzzle. And then on the other side, there is the employees being absolutely terrified,
Yeah.
with the return to work conversation, with the economy, the cycles getting shorter and shorter. And now the AI conversation, there is this genuine fear with, folks who on these kind of conversations in meetings that I'm in, a lot of employees asking like truly like afraid of like, what does this mean for me? And a lot of where I talk about is like, this is an amplifier for you. Absolutely companies will look at this in a way where they will be looking at productivity, but the whole premise for most of these companies, it's not all of them, but there is an exception to every rule. Most companies are looking for bold reinvention and absolutely to increase productivity, but it's about reallocation of energy
Yep.
and reallocation of budgets. It's not about like taking people out and cutting. It's actually about how do we free folks up to do the most valued parts of their work. And to your point at the beginning, there is some things that should be done by humans. Whether or not an AI can do it or not, there are selectively tasks that we should make sure are preserved for human interaction, whether it's human governance or individuals doing it, because how are we going to build the future talent? How are we going to make sure that we are training? You remember when during COVID, graduates and interns working from home with no guidance and no skill
Yep.
ability, they really struggled. So imagine a world where we take all of the learning processes out of all of people going through the ranks of like experience, how much folks will struggle. So I really do think that there is that amplification of the AI and really doing that. One of the things I was super keen to understand from you, so when you think about building, internal marketplaces, looking at, internal mobility as a strategy,
Yeah.
this can be a massive unlock for folks who are worried about job fears, because organizations being really open and transparent about what opportunity and creating that culture of opportunity, right? So there's this
Yeah.
big thing of why you should do it. What do you think are some of the biggest barriers for organizations when it comes to thinking about talent marketplaces, internal mobility, creating cultures of skills, skill power? Like, what do you think is kind of standing in
Yeah.
the way of that?
Yeah, I think to your point, I'll deconstruct what you said a little bit. Part of it is amount around the mindset and the value that skills is going to be a building block and a common denominator. The other element of it is this idea that as organizations, we have a lot of data and a lot of information. We don't have a lot of intelligence that supports understanding, what talent we have and then what talent we need and then what to do about gap closure for that talent. So when building a marketplace, it's important to have not only an employee value proposition of where we're creating access to opportunity, we're democratizing access, we're creating transparency in the understanding of your data so that you can now make informed decisions around how you want to develop for what you're doing now and then how you may want to develop for what you want to do next. The other side of it is really getting the business understanding the idea that, to your earlier point, intelligence is a huge unlock, and we have to start to think about how are we incentivizing people to provide that information so that we can then start to make better investment decisions. So it's always being led by the business. Anytime you're doing anything in relation to a marketplace, it's like what's the ROI for the business? I say one of the top level ones is insight.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what do you mean by insight? That can mean different things for different businesses depending on where they are, because everyone's journey is a little bit different. So some of that could be like, hey, I want to know talent with critical skills that might go into a new functional area. Marketplaces can be a lever to help you best understand that. You may want to know what talent has latent capacity, meaning that they have skills that you wouldn't know about because they're just in role today. But as you encourage people to start to own their data and contribute their information and become more skills informed, they will volunteer more information around their capabilities. And there's a lot of research that supports the idea that employees for the future, all they want, they care about growth more than they care about pay in that context. So when you think about a company having a strong employer brand for the future, that transparency in saying we're going to right skill you, upskill you, and reskill you for the future, no matter what path you want at our organization, I think it's an invaluable position to have, and the mindset I take when it comes to the logic of having a talent marketplace. And I'm just using that as the point and example. It's the idea that an employee can get hired once, but because they have an environment that supports them and supports their growth and supports their upskilling, they can reinvent themselves over and over again through a variety of experiences. And the marketplace should be a platform that facilitates that.
Yeah. A lot of what we've talked about over the period of getting to know each other, you've seen me really focused on work, and in this new era of work, how knowing it just beyond skills is not enough.
Yep.
And, like for me, this big light bulb moment we had a couple of years ago was people have skills, absolutely, but actually work and jobs that they have tasks and you require skills to complete it. And that for us was like a next level down around really transforming it. Why do you think now that this is cutting through so fast in terms of what we're doing around the like what, because everyone was very skills based, and I'm very
Yeah.
skills based too, right? But there is an element that I think we've kind of glossed over a little bit, or maybe it wasn't possible. The work component is now probably core to that conversation. Why do you think that's happening, Kason?
I think because of the volatility in the market. So when you think about, like, to the point around the rapid pace of change and the need for innovation in relation to different functional domains and industries that had a previously a lot of security in what they did, how they did it, you know, pretty traditional, tried and true. Now that's all kind of, that paradigm's kind of shifting. So I think people are more curious about this equation that you've eloquently articulated, and I actually fully agree with and support, because at the end of the day, you can't do skills for skills sake, and skills not connected to task or key outcomes are just words. So you have to then ask yourself, it's like, what are what's the critical work for where we are today and where we're going to go next? What are the critical tasks that support the execution of that work? And then what are the skills that support the execution of those tasks? And then where are the people that may be ready now or might be ready soon, so I can then make different kinds of investment decisions in them to either,
Mm-hmm.
upskill them, borrow them, potentially go out into the market to source them, etc. So I think that's, to me, is the biggest why, and why not. I think it's a different muscle for organizations to start to think about the actual work and in the form of task. I think prior to this era, we made a lot of assumptions that if we found the right talent, they'll figure it out,
Mm-hmm.
and that most organizations didn't have the strength to really articulate what the work is in the form of task. And now that we have these enabling technologies to help us do that, I think it's going to be super impactful.
I think what you said as well hit the nail on the head when you said, like, the whole premise of this shift has been the pressure that companies are under. Because when we first started our company with Reejig, like, the market was caring about retaining their top people. Folks were leaving, people were getting 25% pay rises. There was this crazy like moment in time where things just went a bit crazy, and the evolution or revolution of that moment was actually about like trying to get folks to stay. And there was that tagline of democratizing career,
Mhm.
and that was kind of being played out in market, and the skills-based movement really took a hold in that moment because it felt like it was the answer to the retention issue, which was front of mind for the CEO. And what we have seen, and like just for context as well, like my background is in workforce optimization. So I started my career really focused on moving work to workers. And I know that sounds really like simple, but like my job was to make sure that in a really large organization that I was freely moving work around and that folks were busy and productive. And we were a professional services firm. So like utilization and rates and billability was really important because that's how we made money. So my brain was like programmed for that world. And I thought I always, we built our product for actually the mobility use case for folks driving that, and then we built out the employee side of it. And what we found was that in the market, that was like the thing that people were absolutely jumping up and down for. But very quickly we started to notice that in the marketplace, if you don't understand your work, you don't do a super great job of making recommendations to workers and your employees in your marketplace, because the algorithms are not magicians, no matter what we've all sold you. Like,
Right.
AI is not like a magician. It absolutely requires context about what is the work that's being done. And then it looks at, does this worker or employee or external candidate, whatever way you want to describe it, do they have, the skills and ability and potential to complete this work? And that was our big like super realization early on. And then what you just said was then the next wave that we seen was, oh, whoa, handbrake on. The world has now changed and the CEO cares about completely different things. And suddenly it shifted very much so over to, why is everyone not busy? Productivity, efficiency, and career pathing became this like vitamin, or this like really fluffy HR thing. We find like that became like, even in some customers, we see now that When I'm talking books, very much so, by the way, in the US, and I think it's because the US was right at the front. It led the movement. It was very vocal about, skills based.
Mm.
We even see customers now like, don't, whatever you do, don't talk about skills. Don't talk.
Right.
Don't bring it up. And I think it was because some way it got wrapped into this nice to have bucket, which is absolutely not what it's about. And this is where, like, for me, I'm trying to like unbundle it from like being seen as career pathing as a nice thing to do, and instead being skills is actually critical for you to boldly reinvent your workforce. And it is critical for you as an organization to make sure that you're responsible in making sure that you don't leave anyone behind. And how you do that is through the marketplace you've deployed. And like
Mm.
that's where we think the narrative should be really in market, because we got to move away from the fluffiness or no one's going to get to do these projects. And that's what we're seeing right now, is that a lot of that is happening in a market. Um, and you've been sort of leading in this, in the forefront of like really looking about removing the barriers to get to a place where you're not just doing it for nice to have, you're doing it in terms of your CEO wants your business to be productive and efficient. So you're not just looking at it in that lens. And I think that's a really important lesson for folks who are on the call. Like when you're thinking about communicating this to the business, like how do you talk about the marketplace that resonates with them? Like what are the kind of things that you talk about when you're sort of doing the change program and really getting the
Yeah.
business like understanding? Because I think that's going to be really important information.
Yeah, and I think the change element is so underserved, and there's a lot of research that supports this idea. You can't do change around this as an afterthought. It has to be a deep part of it, and you got to also do a bit of a culture check and understand where your organization is in relation to its norms, and if they're willing to buy into the utility of this kind of work. So to your point around like how to sell it and position the change, I think this boils down to anyone responsible for this kind of work having some business acumen and really understanding the why. Like what are you solving for? And so some of this work as well, again, research and practice supports this, is that it's very hard to do it all at once. Like to do an enterprise sort of scaling of this kind of approach, unless you're in an environment that is lean enough or has the culture already embedded into it, and it's just a value add to that culture. So I would say if you have a strong business case that is solving an issue that has some tangible and measurable ROI, like you either have like a capability gap where you're trying to understand a population, you have a will or an engagement gap where you feel like, hey, I'm not getting as much out of an employee and I want to know a little bit more about them. Or you have like a talent shortage gap where you're
Mm.
trying to say, hey, I know these are roles I have to fill, and I'm not quite sure how I'm going to fill them, whether it's through external hiring or potentially creating some efficiency gains by moving some talent and partnering with the right functions to do that. So I think across the board, from a business value prop, one of those three things will likely register to a leader in some function. And what I tend to do is I tend to look for what I call like a hero case. And by hero case, it's someone that has a burning need, like in one of those three sort of value props. They have a little bit of agency in their decision making, so you have the right leaders sort of bought in, and it's about telling a story. It isn't about the marketplace in of itself. It's about asking them a question like, "Hey, would you feel better about your business if you had a better understanding of the capabilities of your talent today?" And then
Mm-hmm.
allow them to respond to that, and then navigate the conversation around like, well, what has to be true in order for us to get there, and then propose your solution as a part of getting to that kind of truth. And then the last point I'll make is that even with this kind of work from a change perspective, is that it takes a village. So again, if you have the business hook into the why, and then it's about how do you have the support around making sure you're bringing in the right partners, the right collaborators, the right data. So if you happen to work in an organization where you have a people analytics function, where you have a global talent acquisition function, a global learning function, an org readiness or change function. Understand those partners in your ecosystem. Sometimes people wear many hats, but those are the kinds of partners that you have to get bought in to the value of doing skills work before you even really go to the business with a strong case. And so once you audit and assess your partner alignment, you can then tell that story that I mentioned earlier, about creating like a, either an efficiency gain, helping with a talent shortage, a capability gap, or an engagement gap. And then you have a little bit more runway and agency to execute the work.
Mm. I think the thing that's really interesting, and I also agree with you. Like I'm a vendor. I've built a marketplace, right? So for me to say this is a little bit funny, but like technology is not. It's just part of the puzzle. It's not the thing.
Yep.
Like we're just what's serving the data and helping with the recommendation engine. Most of this is actually around mindset, behavioral change, and real transformation. And I think that's where we see the best results is when it's actually like there's a wrapper around this where it's not just, we're bringing in this tech because, we're excited about the technology. It's actually all the parts before it. And that's where the magic really starts to happen. And we see as well really good when you see like someone from the business. It's not like just HR sponsorship, it's actually someone from the business as your sponsor. Where they have like a burning we call it a critical event. Like there's
Yep.
something that has happened that's caused this critical event for this person. And it might be because they're super passionate because they've lost a whole pile of their top performers and that they just didn't realize that they were, not getting access to opportunity. Or it could be because they keep winning all these projects and need to get quick access to talent. Or it could be that the business is unstable for them and they want to keep their people safe, but they want to be able to bench them and put them over other parts of the business when they don't, need them and bring them back. So these are all
Yep.
real reasons right now why people would need to do this in today's market, which aren't directly
Definitely.
connected to that like HR fluffy moment that we were talking about.
No, 100%. Or even going into like a new emerging market and you kind of want to be able to set yourself up and understand, do you have the talent today to deploy into that market? So
Yeah.
it helps inform that strategy as well.
One of the things that I believe in the next, give it 18 months, we are going to see something like we've never seen before. So if you imagine we're all hurtling now towards automation and AI and agents. It's happened, train has left, this is already happening. And
Yeah.
what I believe is going to happen is you're going to have this messy part right now where people are playing and testing and, they're kind of like, everybody go and build your own AI and get used to this thing. And it's just this kind of the subtle pre-part before we really start getting into autonomous agents. And then we're going to move and shift into agents. And that's where really re-engineering and redesigning of work will really start to kick in. And what we're going to see is this part where I can feel, and I don't know how to describe this, but I can feel there's this undercurrent of tension within the employee populations that in all companies right now, you can see it on social media. You can see it everywhere that there is just this like energy around leadership and the decisions that leaders are making and how people are being held to account for these in public and certain things happening with CEOs of healthcare companies, etc. Like there is this undercurrent in the market that is just
Mhm.
sitting below the surface. And what I'm worried about is we are going to move into this full AI mode where it's going to become everyone's driving towards this. And I hope that the moment of the opportunity marketplace and talent marketplace really comes into play again there, because these leaders are going to be in a situation where their employees are going to start rumbling from the bottom, and you'll feel that pressure internally. And suddenly, you know what it's like when something shows up hard enough to a CEO, they quickly pivot and go, I need to solve this problem. And their employees will start complaining and they'll start losing people, and their press and public narrative will start to shift in their direction. And I really think that in about 18 months, you're going to have this reemergence of this surge. Whatever we call it, talent marketplace, it doesn't matter, but there will
Yeah.
be something, and we call it bold and responsible, like this bold reinvention of work right now, but there's this responsible element. I feel like the responsible element isn't sitting at the surface right now. It's kind of being not really talked about, but very
Mhm.
soon we're going to feel this like real handbrake moment again where we've went too far and the marketplace concept. So all of what you're saying, Kason, is so important because I want folks on the call to listen and still remember that, sure, right now there's prioritization that's happening in businesses connected to efficiency, but we want to prepare our workforces for this new where we're going to go, which will be really around when we go into this AI moment. We need to make sure that we give everyone access to meaningful work and we pivot them. And this is where the marketplace and the work that everyone's doing now is going to be more valuable than it's ever been before, because we're going to have a skills crisis that we've never experienced as a society before. And I think that is going to be really important, the work that you're pursuing, the work that you're sharing in market, because we're getting close to that point. And I know that sounds like I'm being really dramatic, by the way, but I just can feel this feeling of an undercurrent where I do believe that this is going to be critical very soon. The timing exactly, not sure, but I think we're about 18 months away from real progress in AI in terms of like real reinvention of the workforce, which will lead to people getting impacted. And when people get impacted, you are not just letting them go, you're impacting their family. You're impacting,
Yeah.
like, there's the ripple effect into society about making these types of changes, right? Do you think I'm like, do you
No,
think
no,
I'm like too out there on that? What do you
I
think?
think it's a genuine concern and position. And what I would evangelize on the other side of it is for every individual and employee, don't wait for that to happen. You
Mm,
know, you have to start taking agency in your own growth and development and start to, your call out is like people should be more intelligent about the trends that are happening in their space, in their field, in their domain, because the more you can influence that and be an advocate for it and understand what those trends mean and how AI is impacting you, then that helps secure you as an indispensable asset in that context. Then you also have the ability to start to learn those either transferable skills or to double down on those more durable skills that will help sustain you and differentiate you versus the perishable skills that will kind of go away, because guess what? Agentic AI can do
mm,
those things. And that goes back to my point earlier about like lower order tasks versus like higher order capacity and capability. So I would encourage any chief learning officers, chief people officers who are driving programs, to start to think about, their upskilling and right skilling solutions in that context. And to the point that you made, also, when I think about, a world where all that is possible and you have these agents as partners with you in the ecosystem, it's also going to create other kinds of unlocks,
mm-hmm,
for how people work, how they access information, how they may, right skill or upskill themselves, or maybe access something at a point of need, to go faster. And this supports the idea of like, what Josh Bersin has been talking about, the super worker logic and construct. It doesn't just end there. I think there's a different pivot where like, yes, the super worker matters because it's about how do you create efficiencies as an employee. But eventually that's going to plateau. And then it's to the idea of when I think about systems, and I think about like as an employee and then also as a business, how are you looking at your systems as a way to unlock and keep your talent engaged, and also as a way to unlock and better understand how to position your business for success, and have that dexterity that you'll need, because I think that's what every organization is looking for now these days is
mm.
dexterity, is the ability to transform and reinvent on a dime with minimal loss, and AI is going to help support that.
And you've talked a lot about empowering marginalized professionals through skill powered design. How do we make sure AI doesn't reinforce existing inequalities in work allocation and career development? Like how do we design that into the system to make sure there's fairness in those decisions?
That's definitely will be it'll take a lot of rigor and a lot of governance. You made the point earlier is that there's a lot you can do with AI, but you also have to have a social responsibility to decide
Hmm.
what you will and won't do. And that's going to be, an organization by organization decision. I also believe that it comes down to, your architecture and principles and how you cross-functionally agree with like either your analytics teams, like whoever essentially is owning the solutions. It could be your IT organization. It varies to as to where these things live. But the point is that it's a cross and even legal. There's a cross-functional partnership for each organization culture as to like where do we draw our lines and why, and then how are we transparent about that. I think that's going to be the most critical thing, and I haven't seen a lot of that in the market of organizations being transparent and saying, "Hey, we're figuring this out too, and we're figuring this
Hmm.
out with you in consideration of you, and we may not get it right the first time, but we're alongside you." Versus the idea of things of employees and talent feeling like things are happening to them. And I think having that culture mindset for any leaders or CHROs or CEOs, I think that's going to really matter as you navigate the next rounds of innovation in the market.
I think the scary thing about AI is the black box, right? And how do you know what decisions are being made and why? So one of
Mm,
the things I think folks can do to protect themselves in terms of when you're buying a company, AI ourselves, any of our peers in market, is you need to make sure that they've had independent audits of their
yep.
algorithms. So there's new laws in New York, there's new laws coming into EU. We before we even designed our actual product, like it would have been like 5 years ago, we actually got our AI independently audited first before we put it into full deployment because we wanted to make sure, and people thought we were nuts. They were like, why would you do this? And we believe that like in order for me to sleep at night, for us to do the right thing, for us to be, really custodians of really good and fair decision making on behalf of our customers, we needed to make sure that we were not just selling you something, because at the end of the day, we can tell you whatever you want to hear, right? But at the end,
Mm,
and like you get your taxes audited, there needs to be some level of governance as you described. And one of the things that, for anyone listening, like make your vendors show the independent audit. And if they have not done an independent audit, do not use them, because they're like, you will be liable in these laws if you make decisions. And there was cases that we've seen like Workday and others where they were being taken to court because someone had been rejected for an opportunity and then said that it was based on their personal characteristics, and you've got to be able to prove that you did not do that. And if you
yeah.
can't prove that, you're in trouble as an organization. So I think one of the things like to be very careful around is that, but that's just one thing that you can put the vendors to do, but also organizations, they know also need to make sure that they're auditing the vendor and that their processes, which becomes even more complex, right?
Yep.
But that's hopefully one thing to get us in the right direction, that your partner who you're partnering with are going to be there with you to make sure that you're doing your best to make decisions based on skills and potential and not someone's personal characteristics.
I
Like
agree.
that's really where we can help as like technology partners, like all of us that are like in this realm. But to your point, there is so many other things that, technology is one part of it. Like it's how do you bake it into the design of your organization, the fabric of who you are, and how you do succession planning, in terms of who gets let go when you're making cuts, like
Mm,
how do you look at it in terms of like what is the compass for your company for good and fair decision making. And that's the one thing that I spend quite a lot of time on in early building Reejig, was like how do we help with that. And it's not an easy thing to solve, and especially now in the markets, as things start to change politically and there's just a lot of
yep.
shift around us, it's becoming very it's a very interesting conversation to have. And how does someone do it in a way where, they're not making a political statement, they're actually doing it because they want to do the right thing and they want to make sure that everyone has access to meaningful work. So I think it becomes one thing you can do that's in your control is to choose a vendor who is actually going to enable that's one step. In a world where we're not seeming to have a lot of decision making control right now, like
Yeah.
how can we help? Switching
No, it's
gears
such a
a
great.
little bit. Sorry, go ahead.
No, no, I'm saying what you said is just such a great point, and I would say anyone who's in a position to do this kind of work, just make sure that you think about those factors in your like your mission and vision, making sure that it's responsible and defensible. I do that with every function I stand up in that
Yeah.
way, and try to navigate your organization to find the right, stakeholders that can support that point of view.
Yeah. And like just to be a bit like blunt, if someone in your if your company is not caring or doesn't want to get into the conversation about, making sure everyone has access to meaningful work, tell them the implications of what happens if you get it wrong and how you'll end
Yeah,
up in court. Because that's a
yeah,
good driver, when it
yeah,
comes to privacy and security. And if you operate in New York, if you operate in anywhere in Europe, if you operate in Australia, these are laws. These are not actual, like visions or belief systems. These are actually the law, and you will be
yeah.
liable. So I think that becomes a other motivator. Unfortunately, you may need to pull that one, but like if you do, it's there. And if you need
Right.
any help, DM me and I can send you some information. From a like CLO, you work, alongside chief learning officers, HR leaders, executives. You're the voice in their ear right now around designing the workforce. What do you reckon that they need to be told to stop doing? Because there's so much nonsense, in my opinion, that has been dragged from I don't even know where, and we're all
Yeah.
saying the same things. But when you're beside them, co-piloting them, advising, telling them from a design perspective, and telling them how to do this, what are the things that they need to stop doing? Because I think they're probably really important lessons that we all need to learn from you.
Yeah, no, no, no. I mean, I can appreciate that question. The way I think about that, the function overall, is that you have to move from the position of feeling like you're in a cost center to being a true value producer. That's like the tension, because depending on the relationship that CLOs and L&D has either within HR or with the business, it's like, hey, you're an order taker, you have compliance training, you have certain things that have a lot of budget and have a lot of administrative weight, and take a lot of work, but are these truly the value add kinds of activities? So it's like, how do you start to re-engineer your learning design function to really drive more of that consultative kind of logic, to really lean into the logic of how are we delivering learning and experiences and reinforcements in association with performance. So like I even think about it like in a previous seat, shifting away from the logic of a learning designer to someone who's like a performance consultant, and then they're using learning and other interventions as tools to help drive and improve performance outcomes. So it's about the shoes that you step into. And then the other piece of it is again similar to the broader statement that I made about like, you know, companies having a lot of data and not a lot of intelligence. To me, I feel like learning data is a great place where you can mine information. So as a thought partner, when I think about this ecosystem of creating intelligence, this, when you think about skills and task and all these different things, this can really help a large scale learning organization become really prescriptive and targeted in its investments. So a great example of this is kind of like, sometimes you have CLOs who have huge spends for external vendors for like content licenses for all the different things, millions of dollars, right? But is that content, if you look at the consumption rates of what people are consuming, how they're consuming it, why they're consuming it, is it aligned to sort of their growth in a way that's driving outcomes? A lot of folks don't have real insight
Mm-hmm.
around that. And as you start to build more intelligence around, what are the skills we have and what are the skills we need, and then what to do about those gaps, now you can make these better decisions around, here's where I'm going to focus my dollars. I'm going to focus my dollars in, targeted programs. I'm going to focus my dollars in technologies that support reinforcement, that uses AI in a way that further optimizes the impact of either my programs or my content. So these are the kinds of things that when I think about a CLO, being able to come to that table and talk about how they're translating that top level business strategy, and then under that talent strategy and then under that into like tangible activities,
Mm,
then that's where I go. And I say that our skills data foundation in conjunction with this idea of task and better understanding the work is that basis where we have that common language, and it helps accelerate the capabilities and the focus of our learning orgs and performance orgs. And I'll make this last point because when you think about what AI is doing in the context of learning as well, is, people may have learning and content at point of need. They may not need a program in the traditional ways we think about it, but that doesn't mean that L&D doesn't have a role in thinking about performance and articulating what good looks like, in being a consultant, in providing coaching, in making sure that enabling technology is gathering the right kinds of data that informs intelligence not only for the business but also for the individual. So these are the kinds of things that I try to get folks to think about, to get into that value-led lens versus I'm a compliance cost center.
mm. There's a good question that's come in the channel as well. I wonder if you see HR moving to be a data enabler or a data disruptor in sharing work intelligence. So being confident in letting go of decisions, but enabling others at the coal face of the business to leverage the data and make informed decisions. Like what's your take?
That's a great question. I would say my pie in the sky would be that this is business led and HR enabled. Like if I were going to take that as a tagline, but when you're starting it, you start it normally, within the construct of HR because there's certain data and processes that exist within HR. But part of that change management, culture management logic that I talked about earlier, that's the pull through that I believe when you're vigilant about it and you think about your strategy with that end state in mind, that the business not only has shared accountability, but they start to own and lead it because they see the value in it, and you've built the trust in that you can support them with the right processes, technology, and resources so that they can continue to invest in making decisions this way with skills data or other types of intelligence.
Yeah. I think I plus one that, and I would say what's going to be the most important thing that I can see for folks in HR, people team, whatever you want to call it, is the being able to communicate data. So there's going to be so much data available now with AI and anyone being able to spin up any form of intelligence, right? It's
Hmm.
the what does it help me do for decision making support, i.e., me, or how do I tell you, my leader, what
Yep.
is the best next action to take? And I think that's a really new skill that folks haven't got their heads around just yet. And I think that's going to be sort of one of the key things that I think we're going to see. And in that sort of, closing, you know, the conversation case, and like, what other things do you think skill wise that folks within the HR and people teams need to care about themselves? Because one of the things I talk about a lot is that no one in HR ever is upskilling themselves because they're too bloody busy.
Yeah.
Like we're looking after everybody else.
Yeah.
So what do you think are going to be the core things that we all need to focus on in our careers to make sure that we're future fit ourselves?
It's a great question, and I think we've teased out a few of them. The way I frame skills is I frame them around like durability and perishability. And what I mean by that is what's in your toolbox versus what's in your refrigerator, like your groceries. The groceries are the tools and the tech that may be cyclical and comes in and out. Your toolbox is like the hammer and the nails, the screwdriver, the things that you can kind of come back to and you just continue to improve them. I think as we become more data driven and data informed, your point to me is the most resonant in the idea that people have to bone up on their data storytelling as a skill, continue to bone up on their stakeholder and relationship management, because again, that shift to performance consultant, like you made the point, it's not so much about all the data and all the tech, it's about the insight and how can you manage the conversation to provide that insight so then that your leaders can make decisions quickly. and it
Hmm.
can do that in a trusted way. And then other sort of, I won't call them table stakes, but there's a lot of reports that support a lot of human-centered skills, emotional intelligence, adaptability, learning dexterity. The other thing that I would call out as a unique one, and I don't think I'm coining it or anything, but it's this idea of it isn't just about AI literacy, it's about AI human literacy. So what I mean by that, it's about how are we, what are the skills that are required to actually leverage technology to go then make that human decision. And I think that's an area that I'm curious about now and exploring and thinking about that and thinking about what are some of the underlying skills that would power someone building that acumen, because I think it'll be really helpful for them going forward, particularly in the learning function or beyond it.
Jason, it is always incredible to talk to you. Thank you so much for sharing your time, your expertise with us, your insights really into sort of where we're at, but where we're going
Yeah.
is always, it always gets me thinking, and really focusing on creating, this design of life and work and the revolution. I love it. Folks, if you haven't read his book, you should. It changed my life in terms of the way I think about things. So you can get the links in the or in the chat. Um, Thank you to everyone for dialing in and for also the folks that are listening on when it's streamed. This is a great one. Thanks, Kason. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you for having me. Have a good day. Bye now.